What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 4 of my reviewing and ranking all the guitar solos on Frank Zappa's Halloween 77. I would say it's a box set, but it wasn't a box set. It was I don't know what I did with it. It was a tiny little USB drive that had all the shows on it that I can't find anymore. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this was the box set. It came in a box. Yeah, everything's on here. There's 6 shows on here from Halloween 77. Yeah, crazy, huh? Oh, Punky. So I'm doing the solos by show, the exact 7 solos in each of the first 4 shows. So that's been interesting, listening to them in order and kind of comparing the solos. So I'm just going to talk about the 7 from 7 to 1, according to my favorite. Drop the list on the screen at the end, and then I'm going to show you how I would rank the shows thus far just based on their solos. And then when I'm done with all of them, I'm going to rank this album compared to every other album, which I think is 69 of them thus far, or 68. I think this is 69. Not sure. But anyways, yeah, number 7 out of Halloween 77, the second show. Oh, this is 10/29/77, show 2, the 4th show that I'm doing so far. The bottom solo would be Punky's Whips. This one almost seems like he never really gets going. Like Frank just wants to wrap it up and end the show and get on to the encore and maybe go home. I don't know. Yeah, this is by far, I think, maybe one of the most perfunctory, just kind of there solos thus far. It's weird. Never really gets sort of an identity. It's just Frank shredding in Punky Whip styles. It's great. I mean, again, this is Frank Zappa. Bozio O'Hearn is the rhythm section. But compared to the others, this one's lacking a little. Number 6 is Muffin Man. Another one that almost... There's a number of solos on here which feel a little more laid back and subdued, like Frank's trying to do things a little bit different. 3 shows into the Halloween run, he's trying to mix it up. This one feels like it's a little more of a less just leave it all on the floor. It's the last song of the night. I'm just going to shred for as long as possible. Yeah, bang your head. This one seems to have a little more of like a nuanced kind of flavor to it. Frank's entering a little more carefully than he normally would. I think there's even a little overlap between him and Baloo for a while. And then once Baloo leaves, Frank's not full 100% attacking. He's kind of reeling it in. But then it just never really goes anyplace pretty crazy. He doesn't really take these early sort of noodlings and explorations of calmer ideas. It doesn't reach sort of a volcanic peak. I mean, it's still a really good Muffin Man solo. But then there are other cases, I want to say the show prior to this, he solos, introduces the band, and then he closes with another solo. This one, he solos, introduces the band, and then conducts the band and leads them out. So it does feel like we're running out of energy at the end of this long night. Like Frank's just not quite pushing it as hard as he was earlier. But yeah, so Muffin Man would be number 6. Number 5 is Leather. Nice, chill, jazzy, laid back. I love the changes over this. Short, it's like a minute long. It just works. Just a really solid solo. Doesn't disappoint. Doesn't really exceed expectations, but it serves its purpose really well. Number 4, City of Tiny Lights. This is a pretty straightforward 77 City. Frank's just attacking from the get-go. You have a lot of little licks and little pockets of really interesting ideas throughout it. Very heavy, very aggressive. It's just that very nice, pounding sort of like rhythm section with Bozio and O'Hearn. One of the things when we get to the end of the solo, it almost like peters out. Like we don't have a smooth transition back into the meow part. Like Frank starts it and the rest of the band is like, oh, we're there already? We didn't realize it. So the solo does have sort of this sort of like, oh, we're just done. Doesn't kind of reach any sort of natural conclusion. It just sort of like, oh, it's over. We're back into this part. And the band doesn't seem like they're right with Frank. Like Frank jumps in a little too early. Like nobody felt like we were ready to go back to the song, but apparently Frank did. It's still good. It's nice and aggressive. But of the City of Tiny Lights thus far, other than the first one, which is almost non-existent, it's probably the weakest of the other 3. But it's still good Frank. Number 3 is Conehead. Without a doubt, the most laid back, kind of chill, kind of taking it easy Conehead. Um, we have a couple Coneheads, so we've had 4 so far. 2 of them are just monstrous beasts, and the other 2 are a little more restrained, a little more laid back, a little more Frank kind of taking his time, letting ideas develop instead of like going from this idea to this idea to this idea and being all over the map in like a really fun exploratory way. There are definitely some weird runs in there where Frank's still being kind of playful, but it definitely doesn't match sort of the weird intensity of a couple of the other ones from earlier in this run. Some really nice sort of piano accents come in. I'm assuming it's Peter Wolf coming in, where those Frank's chill enough and providing enough space in this solo where you can hear more than just like the rhythm section. You get those little like piano accents that come in. O'Hearn and Bozio are still fantastic. But it's definitely one of the chiller, if not the most chill Conehead so far of this run. Still awesome to hear. The vamp is great. It's a great little instrumental. One of those things I wish had stuck around so we could hear what like Vinny and Barrow would have done with this, or what Wackerman and Thunis. This is the instrumental version of Conehead, not the one with lyrics. Would have been neat had Frank just renamed this, or maybe put this as the guitar solo and like Conehead lyrics, this in the middle, Conehead lyrics. That would have been epic. He didn't do that. But still, by far the most chill of the run so far, but still a good solo. Number 2 is The Torture Never Stops. So all of these tortures in 77 have this thing where they start off like the first half, maybe a little more than a third, have this airier, floatier, a lot of like light chords, kind of an early Dupree's solo, early Zoodalures from 76 type solo, maybe early Yo Mama type, not as spacey as that. But really kind of a not as aggressive attack. And then usually around the middle or a little before the middle, Frank will like go into a different tone and it just gets nastier and more aggressive. And the rhythm section starts doing that Chinese water torture plotting that just kind of drives the song. This one doesn't really have that switch as much. It all seems like it's like the vibe is one whole vibe together, and it does get more intense, but I don't think there's a single moment where you go from like the first half being less aggressive to the second half. It just all kind of gradually happens. So it's this really nice ascension into like the more like chaotic, more like pounding energy that the end of these solos bring. It gets funky at times. It's just really interesting. It's cohesive. O'Hearn and Bozio are fantastic. It just really, really works really well as like one continuous piece. And the whole thing, because it doesn't have that shift, maybe feels a little more restrained, but it's almost like you really are like boiling a frog, and like it just gradually gets more and more intense until you realize, oh wait, the water's boiling. How did we get here? It's just really neat. One of the shorter of the Torture Never Stops solos so far, but I think the choices make it more interesting. If there is a problem with this, it's the segue back into the song is kind of not there again. Frank ends his solo. We don't immediately go back into the dun, or I think Frank goes back into the dun dun dun. The band's like, wait, where are we? And they kind of have to scramble to catch up. So if there's a complaint, that's the complaint. But I like the Winter 78 Tortures better than this because I'm not a fan of that shift. To me, that shift can sometimes be too dramatic, and it's almost like two separate solos. This one I think might be my favorite Torture so far because it does seem to exist more on a continuum, and it seems more like a gradual buildup. And then number 1, clearly number 1, might be the best of them thus far as Wild Loves go, but number 1 is Wild Love. So Wild Love and these is where the squirm comes from, bowling on Sharon, Karen, whatever. So it starts off with that squirm aspect. This has very little squirm, and it's a very muted squirm. Frank's like, I'll acknowledge that this is where I squirm, but then I'm going to quickly go off into other things. And it's just, it has a whole different sort of dramatic energy than the squirm. It has more of a like, it just, the entire, everything about this, the what the band is doing to support it feels a little different. Frank's ideas feel different. Like he quickly is like, we're going to start off in the squirm, but then there's a new playground over there I want to go play on, so we're going to go over here. And so it just has like a much more sort of dramatic energy to it, I think, almost like an emotional dramatic energy, almost like a prog buildup. Somewhere towards right before we get to the middle, it starts to get heavy, and we're flirting with like a filthy habits type energy. So we get a little bit of that darkness in there, but it doesn't quite go as dark as filthy habits as much as it stays just a little more just dramatically dark as opposed to the other Wild Loves. We go back to like, oh, there's a section towards the end of it where Frank kind of returns to the squirm idea, but then there's the rhythm almost becomes this really robotic, plodding, almost machine-like type thing that O'Hearn and Bozier are doing. And that just adds to the whole different way this entire one feels compared to the other ones. Like if you want to know what like the typical one sounds like, go listen to Bowling on Karen off Transfusion, which is a shorter and edited version of what these feel like. And that's your typical structure of the first three. You get the squirm, you get some explorations, you go back to the squirm, we get weird at the end. This one has that format only in that we acknowledge the squirm and then we're just going to different places. Then we go back to the squirm, and then we have that little weird fade out at the end that's fantastic. Goes back in like an upbeat, even though it gets weird and robotic at times and stuff, it goes back to this more like upbeat energy. By far, I think it's the most fascinating of them. It's weird because the torture on this show is pretty fascinating. The Wild Love is. Everything else seems to be a lot calmer or more just like, I'm going to do what I normally do. But he really invested something really interesting into this Wild Love. And I think this one, the more you listen to it, the more it pays off. Like it really is a lot of different ideas in here. Definitely worth checking out as far as these Wild Loves go. But yeah, that's what they look like in writing. I think Conehead, I think we've done 4 shows now. Conehead's been number 1 twice. Wild Love has been number 1 twice. I think I think The Torture has been number 2 twice. And has dropped, I don't know. We're all over the map. I'll do a total thing when we're done. But right now, it's between Wild Love and Conehead as far as what's the most consistently great solo on here. That's what the shows look like. I have this as the 3rd great show. Mainly because other than the Wild Love and The Torture, everything else on here is maybe just a little more typical or doesn't quite compare to stuff on the other ones. But this would be my 3rd favorite show so far. They're all good shows, of course, but if I had to pick one, only one to listen to thus far for guitar solos, it's that 2nd show on the 28th. But anyways. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these solos. Let me know if you check them out. Let me know why, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's all I got. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do all those things. And thank you for watching. Peace. Talk to you later.